started. So yes, thank you. This is a webinar about the Draft Wildfire and Landscape Resilience Action Plan with a particular focus on Northern California. Over the next hour and 15 minutes, you can expect to learn about key components of the Draft Action Plan, including the framework for mobilizing regional action. You will have a chance to ask Wildfire Task Force staff your questions about the action plan and learn about the process for reviewing the plan and submitting comments. We will also get to hear from people working in Northern California to advance wildfire resilience, and you'll get to ask them questions as you wish. However, in today's webinar, we will not cover any detailed specifics about funding opportunities and programs. Just a little bit of housekeeping as we get going. We are using the Zoom webinar platform today. We ask that you use the Zoom chat feature only to communicate technical issues to hosts. If something's going wrong for you or you're not sure how to use the platform, we ask that you use the Q&A function built into the platform to ask your questions. So keep your questions in Q&A, technical issues in the chat. During the Q&A time that we have on the agenda, you can use the raise hand button, and you may be called on to come off of mute and ask your question out loud. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be made available at wildfiretaskforce.org. Before we dive in, we'd like to hear from you all to help us better understand today's webinar audience. We have just a couple of questions that will soon pop up through the Zoom webinar platform, and we appreciate you taking a moment to answer them. Again, we are asking just 3 quick questions to gauge the audience here. We'll give people just a couple more moments to answer the poll, and then we will close the poll and share the results. Someone asks, is one high or low? You see in gray there on the text, it says 1 is generally low. So for the first question, 1 would be very unfamiliar, 5 would be most familiar. As well as on question 2, 1 is low, 5 is high. All right, we are going to close the poll and share the results. Thank you all for taking time to answer the poll. It looks like in terms of people's familiarity with the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force really varies across the board. There are about half of the audience is pretty familiar, and the other half is maybe somewhat familiar or less familiar. So we'll be sure to define what we're talking about here and introduce the task force a little bit to you all. And it looks like generally people's familiarity with the draft action plan is a little bit lower than it is with the task force in general. And that's great because that's the focus of our webinar today. So we'll be sure to try to get everyone familiarized with the plan. And the most common answer is that people have attended no regional task force meetings, which is also exciting. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And we are going to share some information actually about a regional meeting that is coming to your region later this year. So thanks for doing that poll. And we are going to jump into today's agenda. We will start with a presentation by the director of the Governor's Wildfire Task Force, Patrick Wright. He will introduce the draft action plan and speak about the framework for mobilizing regional action. This will be followed by an initial time to ask questions about the plan directly to Patrick Wright. Then we will hear from people working in the northern region, 3 different speakers about how their collaboratives are advancing wildfire and landscape resilience in Northern California. That will be followed by a longer Q&A for the regional speakers as well as Patrick Wright as needed. And we will close with information about how to access and provide comments on the draft and about that regional meeting coming up in Northern California. So with all that set up, I will now pass the mic to Patrick Wright, Director of the Wildfire Task Force.
Thank you, Madeline. What I'm going to try to do is walk everybody through basically a quick overview of the task force, also a broad-based overview of the action plan. There's a lot to cover. Obviously, there's only a limited amount we can do, but hopefully it'll give you enough information to then be able to follow up on specific areas of the plan that are of most interest of you. So again, it's mainly intended to give you a flavor of the scope and scale of the plan, with the hope that for those of you who are reviewing it, we're in the middle of a 60-day comment period right now, in terms of giving you more context as you prepare comments or just to better understand where you fit in. So the first slide is just a couple slides here on the task force itself. The most recent version of the task force was established about 5 years ago. In January 2021, we put out the state's first ever Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan, which was an attempt to try to put in one document all the various efforts of state and federal agencies to try to get a handle on wildfire resilience. So really was hoping that it would provide a framework for a more collaborative effort moving forward. A big role of the task force has been to try to attain our forest resilience and wildfire resilience goal through a collaborative process that takes many agencies who have traditionally worked in silos, and stakeholders and local groups have been working on their own to develop a more comprehensive collaborative effort to align the work of federal, state, local, tribal, and private entities. The next couple slides give you a sense of how we're organized. We have an executive committee that reflects that emphasis on alignment. We've got several very high-level state leaders, federal leaders, local leaders from the counties, and tribal, at least one tribal representative as well. And then we've got a bigger structure beyond our executive committee that includes an interagency staff that's drawn from the Resources Agency, CAL FIRE, DOC. We have an independent science advisory panel that's made up of some of the top experts in California. And then we have roughly a dozen different work groups where we're working actively with stakeholders. One of the differences of the task force and other state processes is these work groups and a lot of the work of the action plan is actually stakeholder driven. The co-chairs of these work groups are driving our policy in many of those areas, certainly with agencies at the table, but the real emphasis is a collaborative effort where local and regional stakeholders are partnering with the agencies to try to drive our agenda. And then finally, we've got what we call a planning integration team of all the agencies, logos you see at the bottom, to try to make sure we are connected with a wide variety of agencies that are working in this space. And then the next slide, if I can remember it, talks about our approach to meetings. We have 4 meetings a year, 2 in Sacramento, 2 in the region. The regional meetings are really our signature efforts where we get out there, where our cabinet officials, high-level federal folks can hear firsthand from local and regional leaders. What are they accomplishing? What are the challenges? Where do they need more help? We often have really candid conversations about what's working and not working. We most recently had a meeting in Jamestown, in the not too far from Sacramento, Sonora area, where we had 500 people attend and over 350 online. So it's a sign that these meetings we think have been effective in trying to build a network of practice for folks that are in this space and want to connect with each other statewide, to learn from each other and to address challenges and barriers together. Our next meeting is up in Humboldt County, may or may not be in Fortuna, but we're still working on that. But it'll be in Humboldt County in October. You'll see registration links. I think you might even get one today as part of the chat, as part of our effort to get people registered for hotels early. And then the actual registration will be released sometime very soon. So you can look forward to that. And then, certainly in terms of where we've come, just to tread lightly on that, we've had the benefit several years ago of some fairly large investments on the state and federal side that we've worked to try to align and get out to the regions in an effective way. That's enabled us to ramp up to be treating more than 700,000 acres annually, including a doubling of prescribed fire. We've just gone through a significant effort to streamline regulatory processes. More than 400 projects went through that process and got permits in less than 30 days. And we're now working on a successor approach to that with the legislature. We spent a lot of time, particularly with the RFFC program, and a lot of money on capacity building. That's really enabled many of you to have finally the resources you need to be able to scale up. And then we have a broad range of interagency strategies, everything from prescribed fire to reforestation to private landowner assistance, where agencies that have previously run separate programs are working together to try to advance our efforts in each of those areas. And then finally, we've developed a whole new set of data and tools. Again, the primary purpose of helping local and regional agencies move quicker and smarter by enabling them to understand where projects are happening, and to build better tools for planning, prioritization, and reporting on the results of projects. So that just gives you a brief flavor of kind of where we've come. I'm now going to switch to where we're headed with the action plan update. It has been 5 years since the last plan was updated. And so fortunately, this time, unlike the last plan, we have a solid foundation, as I've mentioned. We have a much better understanding of the benefits of prescribed fire, of thinning, of having a fuel break network, of building local and regional capacity and growth. A lot of that's captured in our scientific consensus document. We asked our science advisory panel to prepare, so you can find that online. That gives us the latest thinking on the types of projects that work and how effective they are. Again, on building capacity, we're a long way from where we were 5 years ago, where we have a much, much stronger network of local and regional entities that are able to take projects to the next level. As I said, we're going to continue to work on streamlining and investing more and more in science and data tools to enable local and regional agencies to better plan and prioritize projects. So we've got a much stronger foundation this time to be able to take the program to a whole new level in terms of scaling up and better documenting the success of the projects that you folks are undertaking. Next slide. So, we struggle with how we're going to organize ourselves. Of course, everything's linked in the wildfire space, but there are distinct landscape resilience strategies and community wildfire preparedness strategies. Yes, there's a lot of overlap there, as you can see from this diagram, but we are advancing strategies in both arenas, together with the third strategy that we call our framework, that talks more about how we're going to get this done, the mechanics of getting money out the door, of developing regional plans and reporting on progress. So I'm going to briefly walk you through each of those three, starting with the landscape resilience strategy. And in this case, it's really based on a whole series of peers that I'll go through one by one. First and foremost, in the next slide, is an emphasis on treating high priority areas. Our data are showing us if we really focus on the high and very high hazard landscapes in the north, and we focus on areas of high ignition reduction potential in the south, we can get a much bigger bang for the buck. And so we're certainly going to be encouraging and trying to give local and regional entities the tools they need to better identify these areas and match them with areas that are high priorities locally for each of you. So that's number one. Number two, and the next slide is an emphasis not just on fire, but also an emphasis on drought, particularly in the Sierra Nevada. Our science and our modeling is showing that in many areas we need to go beyond, treatments need to go beyond the levels that are necessary just for fire to help deal with climate change, drought, insects, etc. So it's a combination of measures: wildfire resilience, drought resilience. The overall goal is forest health, not just fire, though fire resilience is certainly the foundation of much of our work. Third area of emphasis, as you'll see on our next slide, is building out a statewide network of fuel breaks, fire management zones, pods. All of these are related for many reasons. One is to help with our firefighting efforts so that we can better manage fires when they occur. Secondly, to build a framework to enable more prescribed fire. If we've got these pods in place, makes it a lot easier to get approval and move forward on prescribed fires. And then third, manage fire. It's a wonderful ability to, a wonderful tool to be able to increase our capacity to just manage fire across the board if we've got these networks in place. So working hard to link the Forest Service network with the private landowner network and with the new CAL FIRE network that is coming soon. So those are three of the top priorities. Number four is, of course, significantly expanding beneficial fire. I think the North Coast in many ways is ahead, leading the way on this. As many of you know, we're trying to streamline permitting. We're building a capacity program. We've got a liability fund finally in place. We're doing what we can to expand cultural burning and also build smoke management coordination programs across the agencies. So lots taking place in prescribed fire, beneficial fire area, but certainly a lot more that needs to take place if it's going to get to the level that we hope it'll become. And then finally, I think our last priority under landscapes is to really have a new focus on restoring post-fire landscapes. This is not something that's captured a lot of public or legislative attention, but a lot of concern that we're losing large acreages of lands that have the potential to be converted to shrublands if we don't take a more active, aggressive approach to reforest those lands, particularly through climate-informed practices. So you can see a high emphasis in the draft plan on finding the funds and aligning agencies to address our highest priority reforestation needs. So I hope that gives you at least a snapshot. This is sort of a summary for our, broader Northern California, again, networks of strategic fire zones, focus on high hazard areas near communities and wildlands, emphasis on reducing density, particularly in the Sierra Nevada for forest health reasons, in addition to fire, to have a bigger emphasis than we've had on reforestation, and then continue our progress in ramping up beneficial fire. The next slide, kind of Southern California, I just talk about this briefly. The game there, of course, is reducing ignitions and restoring their montane forest. So a little bit of a different emphasis, much more attention being given there to highway networks, utility networks that are the source of ignitions. And so it's just we want to make it clear from the beginning that we're not talking about a one-size-fits-all strategy, really trying to tailor our statewide strategy to reflect local needs and priorities. And then finally, I think if I got this right, this is more of a Northern California perspective. What our modeling and our data show is if we can ramp up and reach our roughly 1 million acre target and treat the most high hazard landscapes, highly dense landscapes, those landscapes that are the most important regionally, we also build up this pod network and begin to address the restoration backlog. That will then put us in a position to even more rapidly scale beneficial fire as a maintenance mode. We will have, by that time, gotten our forest in a much more resilient state. It should then allow us to shift more into a maintenance mode where, again, we can primarily use beneficial fire and get a better handle on fires as they occur because we will have largely addressed the restoration backlog. So that's the vision, to really have a strong focus over the next 10 years on these areas with the hope that we can then move into maintenance mode. Next slide. And of course, none of this is possible without interagency strategies in each of these areas I've talked about, everything from beneficial fire to chaparral, private landowner, reforestation, recreation, we've wood utilization and workforce. We have work groups and shared strategies, what we call them, that are meant to align state, federal, local, tribal, and private efforts in each of these areas. So you can see at a glance where is the state heading with reforestation, with wood utilization, with workforce. This is going to continue to be a big part of what the task force is bringing to the table. So that I hope gives you a flavor of kind of where we are on the landscape side, moving to the community side, obviously a different but complementary emphasis on things like structure protection through Zone 0 and defensible space, and a number of other strategies that I'll just very quickly walk through these next couple of slides. The first one, of course, is the focus on structure protection. The Board of Forestry is moving rapidly towards completing its effort on Zone 0 standards that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then meanwhile, CAL FIRE is spending a lot of time on trying to develop better data and better tools to assess the risks that individual structures are facing, communities are facing, and put a lot of time into risk modeling, again, to help local and regional entities better evaluate the trade-offs and the potential for focusing their funds where it matters most. Secondly, bigger emphasis on county-wide CWPPs. We have a very scattered system in California. CAL FIRE is convinced that we're certainly not going to abandon all the collaborative efforts that are out there, but really place more emphasis on county-wide CWPPs so that we can begin to have a more focused statewide network where folks know where to go to understand how various community preparedness programs are linked. So look forward to much more information from CAL FIRE on how we're trying to work with the CWPP and county-based network to try to align them at the community level. A third area on the community side, of course, as I mentioned, is unwanted ignitions. We're beginning to develop stronger partnerships every day with utilities for power lines, and Caltrans is really stepping up, spending a couple $100 million every year on roadways specifically for wildfire resilience. So you're going to see more emphasis of that moving forward, partnerships with utilities and partnerships with Caltrans. And then I think, so that's basically the community strategy. Again, at a glance, it doesn't do justice to the full measure of the plan, but obviously there's a lot more detail in the draft plan itself. Our final section of the plan is, okay, how are we actually going to align ourselves to get this work done? And we're not going to get it done by having state agencies map the state, identify priority areas, and attract them. We're taking a regional approach where instead our approach is to try to the maximum extent possible, give local and regional entities the tools they need to address their specific priorities and ramp their efforts up. And so that's everything from planning to permitting to implementation to reporting and funding. How can we align ourselves both in Sacramento among state agencies and federal agencies to support local and regional efforts? So I'll give you just a flavor of some of the trends underway as we try to do that. The next slide kind of gives you a snapshot of organizationally how we plan to do this. Department of Conservation has been leading the development of regional priority plans. We're going to hear from the leaders of the 3 major plans in the North Coast next. And then, as I said, at the community level, much more of an emphasis on county-based plans. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap there, but we do think there are unique focus areas at the landscape level and the community level that warrant having complementary systems. So that's going to be the framework moving forward. And then as part of that, this next graph kind of gives you a flavor of how we've approached this issue in the last 5 years. We've gotten, as I said, hundreds of millions of dollars, particularly at the state level, and almost all of that money has gone out to individual projects. We funded more than 2,000 projects at the state level, and we actually have data, as the next slide shows, that those projects are hitting the mark, that 83% of the acres treated were in areas, as we suggested, that are in high or very high hazard areas. So the issue is not that we aren't hitting the mark on these projects. The issue is we need to scale up. We're not going to achieve our wildfire resilience goals one project at a time. And so this next slide gives you a flavor of where we're headed with a new emphasis on block grants. This is an example in Southern California where instead, as you saw in that earlier slide, where we're funding dozens of individual projects, instead, CAL FIRE matched its forest health and wildfire prevention grants with some Forest Service money, and was able to issue a grant that covers 6 sub-regional areas, 23 sites, and over 20 partners. Really allows us to do the kind of scaling we need. Also helps with things like workforce, because when you go project by project, you've got to scale up, scale down your workforce. You've got to do permits, you've got to do, environmental review, et cetera. So we're hoping by moving towards regional RFFC plans that are funded by block grants, we're going to be able to scale much quicker. The North Coast Partnership was one of our first areas that we gave a block grant, so we're certainly going to rely on that model more moving forward. As the next slide shows, another benefit of that is allows us to better assess how we're meeting our goals. Very difficult to assess benefits of individual projects. But as this graph shows, again, from Southern California, where we looked at if we were going to implement our highest priority ignition reduction projects, what our model shows that the reduction in burn probability would be across Southern California. This is really where we want to be statewide, is have a network of plans and to be able to assess their benefits collectively. The next slide kind of gives you a flavor of how we're trying to do that. Organizationally, we've got CAL FIRE, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and DOC all moving forward with landscape scale grants that reflect this new approach. So we hope you'll work with us to make this new approach a success so we can all scale our respective efforts up more than ever before. And then finally, of course, we faced a question of how we do this, how we set boundaries. We spent a lot of time trying to match up Forest Service boundaries with state boundaries. As you can see from this slide, we have 4 major task force boundaries that encapture forests without cutting any of them in half. And then secondly, we're establishing a set of subregions that's still in draft. You see on the left a map of the so-called RFFC subregions, including the 3 in the North Coast area that we'll hear from soon. And then the task force then is taking the Forest Service map together with the RFFC map, trying to come up with a global network of areas where we'll be asking for 5-year plans of work for each of these areas that include all Forest Service projects, state parks, CAL FIRE, Caltrans, utility, all the projects that are taking place so that we can better advance those projects, find money for those projects, and better assess their benefits rather than, again, trying to continue to work on a project by project basis. We think the scaling is going to be vital to get where we need to be. Next slide. And so again, just to summarize on the mobilizing regional action, we're doing everything we can to try to align planning using these sub-regional and county-based plans of work. We're going to try to give local regional agencies the tool they need to focus on the highest priority landscapes. We're going to be shifting from project grants to block grants. We're going to continue to focus on one-stop shop permitting. And then finally, on the implementation and reporting, we're going to continue to work together through regional partnerships and begin to move from acres treated to the kinds of outcome-based measures that people have been asking for. So hope that gives you a summary of the many efforts that are underway. The last slide is some of our efforts to try to, again, document the success. We do have an interagency tracking system that is tracking all the projects that are taking place, where they are, what type of projects they are, and we're establishing a new data hub that through which all of this information will be publicly available. Next slide. So again, I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time, but it's a measure of how much is underway. Our major hope in this kind of a workshop is basically just to introduce you to the plan. A lot of efforts are underway. You may be familiar with some of them, but not other one. But hopefully it'll guide your review and participation in the process as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. That was a great overview of the plan. We now have time for questions from the audience about what you've just heard about the action plan, that you can ask Patrick. We will be moving to more regionally specific content after this. So again, this is a great time to ask questions about the plan, things you were expecting to hear about that you maybe want more detail on. We have two ways for you to ask your questions. You can use the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar to type your question, or if you raise your hand, oops, I just raised my hand. If you raise your hand, we will be able to give you the ability to speak and ask a question directly. We have a question here from Eric. The question is, there it is. What are some examples of outcome-based measures of success other than acres treated? So what might be some outcome-based measure examples?
Sure. Well, one example is the density of trees particularly in the Sierra Nevada, has been a sort of a leading estimate there. From a forest health perspective, other indicators on the fire side are things like probability of high severity fire, flame length. So there's a lot of different measures out there that both look at forest health and look at fire resilience from various perspectives. We do have a set of roughly 20 to 30 of them that are in the draft plan that's online. But that hopefully gives you a couple examples.
Thanks, Patrick. I have some great questions in. There's a question, Patrick, about there's a lot that's being talked about how to get funding on the ground more quickly. How can we maybe balance that, or what are the mechanisms that may be in place to balance getting funds on the ground quickly using block grants with also ensuring that funding is distributed fairly, equitably, competitively? How can maybe new players get into the implementation space?
No, that's a good question. And I think from a more historical perspective, before the RFFC program came along, I would say virtually all, not just wildfire, but natural resources funding came through bonds because there's virtually no general fund money available. Never really has been for projects. And so traditionally, the way things worked is that local and regional agencies were expected to basically develop projects and then come to the state for funding for implementation once you had a shovel-ready project. And of course, that strongly favored more sophisticated, wealthy applicants. And so what's really changed in the last several years is through the RFFC program. For the first time, there's been roughly $150 million spent solely on capacity building, targeting areas that are actually less sophisticated and less equipped. So we are trying to do both. We're trying to fund areas that are ready to go, have projects that have been through environmental review and are shovel ready, but we're also spending a fair amount of money just on organizationally to get RCDs and other organizations the staff and resources they need so they can compete better. So I think you're going to continue to see that dual focus. Hopefully over time, my view, which we'll see, is that we will begin to shift to more direct funding to each of these areas of the state, rather than having a competitive beauty contest to those that arguably are able to submit the best applications. We could sit down with each region and sub-region and tailor the state's assistance to what you need. But we certainly aren't ready yet for that framework. I'm hopeful that once the RFFC framework is built out statewide, we can begin to turn to that kind of an approach.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for that answer. Yeah, really important question. We're getting a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A. I also want to invite anyone who would like to come off mute and raise their hand and share a question in their own words. we also can do that. So I'm going to tee up one more from the Q&A, and in the meantime, if anyone wants to raise their hand, we can do that. So the question, Patrick, a question from Nicole is about if you can just speak a little bit more to what might be coming or what is in the works around streamlining permitting for vegetation management, fuel reduction. Just talk a little bit more about what's in the plan around
Yeah.
streamlining and permitting.
Well, I think the short answer is there's a lively debate in the legislature on that right now. We've come through a very successful streamlining process, but it was conducted under an emergency order. And so to be able to have a sustained effort, we need new legislation that authorizes that. And as you can imagine, that sparked a fairly spirited debate over how much streamlining should take place, what the sidebars should be, what acreage limitations there might be, and other restrictions. And so there are a couple of bills in the legislature right now that are addressing that issue. And so the administration and legislature are going to continue to work hard over the next month or two to try to see if we can make that a successful effort. The bill number, the main one is 1370. And then there's also a coastal one that I believe is 2410. I think both of them are AB, but I'm not, versus SB, but I'm not sure.
Thanks, Patrick. We are now going to move on from Q&A. There's a lot coming in, and our team will do also the best to answer what we can over with some text-based answers, and we'll have a longer time for Q&A at the end. So wrapping, again, this portion, introducing the plan, we're going to move on to hearing from our regional speakers. We have 3 regional speakers who will be sharing a bit about the collaborative work that they're taking on in different parts of the very large northern region. We are first going to hear from Allison Blodorn. Allison is the Forest Health and Restoration Program Director with Resource Conservation District of Napa County. And Allison will be speaking about the work of the Intercoast Collaborative. So Allison, I pass the mic to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Maddie. And thank you so much, Patrick, for teeing up kind of who the RFFC regional groups are. Next slide, please, Maddie. I'll just give some brief context setting to introduce both myself and my colleagues that you'll be hearing from today, and the northern region more broadly. So the northern region makes up 15% of the state. It's home to a large number of tribes, is economically challenged, has been profoundly impacted by wildfire, and is also a biodiversity hotspot. It is represented by 3 regional entities that you'll hear from today, who are all recipients of the Department of Conservation Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program block grant funding. That includes Intercoast Collaborative, which I'll be speaking to, the Northern Sacramento Valley Coalition, and the North Coast Resource Partnership. We all have long track records of regional collaboration, including building out frameworks and processes to support equitable science and community-informed planning, implementation, and reporting. Next slide, please. So now I'll put my Intercoast Collaborative hat on. So the Intercoast Collaborative was formed in early 2022 with funding from the RFFC program. And this collaboration really built on strong existing relationships between the partners that make up, the lead partners that make up the collaborative. And that includes Colusa, Napa, Solano, Sonoma, and Yolo Resource Conservation Districts, as well as Clear Lake Environmental Research Center. A little bit about our specific subregion. You can see the map on the right showing kind of what our boundaries are. 30% of our region has been impacted by fire since 2017. And the impacts of these fires revealed a gap in local capacity to support wildfire resilience efforts. Our region has a wide variety of landowners and land use types, and it's notable that we have a high percentage of small private landowners, which really shapes the way that we approach our regional wildfire resilience efforts. The fire impacts really spurred regional collaboration and capacity building. My Intercoast Collaborative partners and I have built out or significantly scaled up our forest health and wildfire resilience programs over the last 5 years, and invested deeply in hiring and training staff, broadening and deepening partnerships, and investing in project planning and permitting. Next slide, please. So our collaborative is represented and governed by a lead partner in each county, and we each serve as the local hubs that represent the context and needs of our more local communities. And we also support county level collaboration and act as a conduit for cross-county and regional collaboration. Our partnership is codified by a memorandum of agreement, and we utilize a consensus-based decision-making framework to support our shared governance structure. Our collaborative is committed to equity, inclusivity, and transparency, and we center a holistic approach to forest health and wildfire resilience that's grounded in the shared goals of science and community-informed conservation and restoration. Next slide, please. So I want to give just a brief snapshot of some of our accomplishments over the last few years, thanks to our regional forest and fire capacity funding. And I do want to say at the front that all of this is in deep collaboration with a variety of partners across the region, not just the Intercoast Collaborative lead partners. Collectively, we have leveraged $55 million in grant funding, which is a 6.5-fold return on investment of our RFFC funding. We've developed 57 projects with partners across the region, building a pipeline of shovel-ready projects. We've hosted 3,500 training hours regionally, building local knowledge and expertise. And one thing that's particularly exciting and we're really proud of is that we've created or supported 4 prescribed burn associations regionally, building community capacity to increase the pace and scale of beneficial fire. I also want to just briefly highlight a regional program that's a testament to how regional partnerships are critical to achieving impact at scale. While this program has primarily been funded by CAL FIRE, our regional forest and fire capacity funding has been invaluable in allowing us to fill critical gaps in funding and maintain momentum as our funding ebbs and flows over time. So this is the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. It was developed directly in response to community needs in the aftermath of recent fires. Small private landowners were really motivated to manage their forested land, concerned about issues of wildfire risks, but lacked the know-how in many instances and financial resources needed to invest in that. A group of RCDs and nonprofits came together in 2020 with funding from CAL FIRE to develop the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. This is a regional cost share program serving Lake, Mendocino, Napa, and Sonoma counties. And what's really exciting about this program is that it's locally designed and managed, which allows us to be nimble and responsive to local needs. So we set the project application and ranking processes. We develop payment rates and reimbursement rates to be regionally appropriate to the cost of doing work in our region. And we manage all of the internal administrative systems needed to allocate, manage, and track funding and program reporting metrics. To date, the North Bay Forest Improvement Program has empowered private landowners to treat over 1,700 acres, developed 28 forest management plans, and has deployed over $1.8 million in landowner incentive payments. Next slide, please. So in parallel to investing in critical capacity building needs and planning needs across the region, we've also been hard at work developing the Intercoast Regional Priority Plan. We're currently midstream in our development of our regional priority plan, and it will be completed by spring 2027. We designed our planning process to build on local knowledge and expertise and complement existing plans. So for example, community wildfire protection plans serve as the foundation of our project portfolio, with the goal of identifying gaps and opportunities for cross-boundary collaboration and landscape scale projects to really broaden and strengthen our project portfolio. We currently have gathered over 500 projects from existing plans and will be soliciting additional projects this fall. Our approach to project evaluation and prioritization centers a multiple benefit lens that aligns with state objectives. So we're adapting the state's pillars of resilience to develop a data-driven method of evaluating the multiple benefits of projects with the goal of ensuring a replicable replicable and reliable approach. We're currently gathering input from partners across the region on this approach. We also aim to maximize adaptability and utility of our plan over time. Landscape conditions change, our community's needs change, so we'll be continually updating it to make sure that our plan stays current. And then as regional funding comes online, as we're seeing is happening currently and really exciting to see, we'll be developing funding specific requests for proposals to equitably and transparently allocate funding for implementation of regional priority plan projects. With that, I'll hand it over to the next presenter. Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you. That's such a great summary and overview of how your group is working, the outcomes that you've achieved, and yeah, how you're adapting your approach to the local context of where you're working, because this wildfire and landscape health challenge looks different even within a region. We will now hear from Samuel Perkins. Samuel is with the Glenn County Resource Conservation District and works as the Northern Sacramento Valley Coalition Coordinator. I believe of the three groups, this coalition is the newest, and so it will be great and exciting to hear about what the coalition has planned and what the approach that is emerging. So pass it over to you.
Thank you, Madeline. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Perkins, and I'm the coordinator for the Northern Sacramento Valley Coalition, or NSVC. I'm excited to speak on the role and accomplishments of NSVC, so I will jump right in. Next slide, please. Just for some context about how our partnership came together, with excellent, well-established organizations to the west, like the North Coast Resource Partnership, and to the east, like Sierra Nevada Conservancy. The Northern Sacramento Valley was without a major regional voice in wildfire prevention and forest health. The California Department of Conservation's RFFC program brought together Glenn County Resource Conservation District, RCD of Tehama County, Western Shasta RCD, and Shasta Valley RCD to create NSVC in 2022. As a note, we only have a small portion of southern Siskiyou County within our region, as you can see on the map, and about 2/3 of Shasta County, because it's just the regional boundaries of Western Shasta RCD. So NSVC seeks to establish shared decision-making processes, an information sharing nexus, and a collaborative approach to planning and implementation of wildfire prevention and forest health projects, filling critical capacity gaps in the region. One of my goals as a coordinator is to expand NSVC to include more partner organizations, but building trust and shared decision-making governance structures does take a lot of time. Next slide, please. So why is this work necessary here? As you can see, the red areas are recent burn scars over the last decade. As we know all too well, devastating wildfires have become a reality for Northern California and have become more severe and frequent in recent decades. Sacramento Valley is the agricultural hub of Northern California and is home to critical ecosystems and centers for outdoor recreation. This is surrounded by fuel-loaded forests that will further threaten the ecological and economic health of the state if not addressed. I will speak to some of the projects the RCDs and our coalition are doing in the area, but they all are actively doing important post-fire rehabilitation and fuel reduction work in the Mendocino National Forest, the Shasta Trinity National Forest, and the Lassen National Forest in response to the August Complex, the Park, the Dixie, the Carr, the Zogg, and the McFarland fires, just to name a few in the last decade. Roughly 1.5 million acres burned within our coalition boundary. Next slide, please. So in order to create a shared framework NSVC convenes virtual biweekly meetings and in-person meetings once per quarter to discuss regional priority planning development, ongoing issues, and project developments. This has ultimately led to the development of data standards for our RPP that is coming soon, as well as a portfolio of projects that includes RCD projects as well as some other partners. Currently in development, we are working on assessment and methodology guidelines and a technical advisory committee for project prioritization. We really want it to be shared decision making and as equitable as possible if we receive future implementation funding. We're currently working on a draft of our regional priority plan that we hope to roll out in Q3 or Q4 of this year. And then we will begin project solicitation for partner organizations. We've begun initial outreach to key partners in our region, including the Forest Service, Shasta County Fire Safe Council, Tehama County Public Works, and the Siskiyou Area Wide Mitigation Coalition. These just include initial meetings. And then once we have a draft of our RPP, I hope to expand that outreach. As I said, my goal as the NSVC coordinator is to widen our net and bring in as many partners and their projects as possible. For our RPP, we really want it to be a one-stop shop for potential funders. Next slide, please. So the RFFC program has created critical capacity funding and has led to RCD staff gaining drone piloting certifications and increased GIS capacity for project development and monitoring. This enhanced capacity will enable the RCDs to serve as a mapping resource for partner organizations for incorporation into our RPP. All four RCDs also have extensive experience with CEQA and NEPA and have successfully navigated those processes. The RCDs have worked and will continue to work with partner organizations to provide technical assistance and support environmental compliance, which is key for getting projects shovel ready. RCD of Tehama County has made key equipment purchases to implement projects directly, streamlining their work. In 2024, Western Shasta RCD created a new forestry intern program to train the next generation of land stewards. They have since continued this work and are currently housing 6 interns providing critical field work. We hope to expand this program. Individual RCD engagement efforts have led to new or expanded partnerships with county public works departments, state and federal agencies, local tribes, including the Paskenta Band of Nomlaki Indians, as well as private timber companies. Another big goal of mine is to really build out our tribal engagement efforts in the region. Next slide, please. So the RFFC program has allowed our RCDs to leverage this funding into $62 million as of 2025. This funding doesn't mean just planning, it means action to increase the pace and scale of projects. Glenn County RCD's Stony Gorge Hazardous Fuels Reduction Project became an RFFC demonstration project. This unique multi-benefit project then led to the development of the Needham Hazardous Fuels Reduction Project, Phase 1 and 2, which create a 13-mile continuous fuel break with planning underway to expand the project and hopefully down into Colusa County. RCD of Tehama County's work in the Mendocino National Forest includes hazardous tree removal post-August complex fire, as well as reforestation efforts, and they're in phase 3 of that project. As Patrick stated, the reforestation is like a huge piece of what we're trying to accomplish. They're also treating critical acreage in and around the Park Fire burn scar in East Tehama County. After the 2018 Carr Fire burned the entirety of the Rock Creek watershed, which is a critical tributary to the Sacramento River, post-fire runoff destroyed a large culvert crossing and left this runoff with nowhere to go, threatening ecosystems and infrastructure. Western Shasta, in collaboration with the California Conservation Corps and federal partners, removed the crushed culverts, and restoration of the natural stream channel will be completed this summer. In southern Siskiyou County, Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District is completing critical defensible space projects to protect communities surrounding Mount Shasta and the I-5 corridor, which is a high severity fire hazard area. As Patrick and the task force have said, we need to treat these high impact areas, which NSVC and its partners are doing every day. On top of that, we and our partners are working on critical projects to restore ecosystems damaged by previous wildfire. These projects cross multiple ownership types and land types, which is critical for landscape scale. Next slide, please. This is just kind of an example of what our RPP, a piece of our RPP is hopefully going to look like. The photo on the left is really an older map of our portfolio projects, but it might give you guys an idea of how your projects can plug into it, and how the RCDs can support you in getting the GIS data standards. And we just, like I said, we really want everyone's projects in here so that funders can see all of the projects in our region. Next slide, please. That's all I have. So thank you to Madeline and the rest of the team for herding the cats. And thank you to Brian, Mary, and Katya and the rest of the RFFC staff at DOC. And finally, thank you to Patrick and the task force for putting this together. I would highly recommend going to a task force regional meeting. And yeah, please reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Sam. That was a great overview of your region and yeah, the work of your coalition. We're going to now move to, and again, questions for Sam or for Allison can be addressed at the end. We're going to hear from our last regional speaker. We have Karen Gaffney with us. Karen is the Director of Strategic Planning and Communication with the North Coast Resource Partnership. I will pass it to you, Karen.
Great. Thank you, Madeline. And thank you to my colleagues, Sam and Allie, and thanks to the task force team and Patrick for inviting us to be here today. So I'll talk a little bit about how we work in partnership with a variety of entities, including the task force and DOC and other local and regional and tribal leads. Next slide, please. So just some context, the North Coast region as we define it is the tribal lands and all are part of 7 North Coast counties. So it's about 19,000 square miles or 12% of California. It's a source region for forest-based carbon, water, and biological diversity. It's also profoundly economically disadvantaged with over 50% of the population living under the poverty line. It's home to 35 tribes, and it's been disproportionately impacted by wildfire over the last 25 years. Next slide. The North Coast Resource Partnership has a mission to enhance the quality of life in North Coast communities and ecosystems, and it does that by achieving multiple integrated objectives related to wildfire and climate resilience, water quality and supply, biodiversity and ecosystem function, community health and safety, and local economic vitality. Next slide. The partnership is governed by a leadership council, which is, as far as we know, nationally unique in that it is a tribal and county co-leadership model where appointees are appointed from the region's tribes and counties. So you have local governments and tribal nations, sovereign nations working together. And there's also a technical peer review committee, also comprised of tribal and county appointees, and then a strong relationship with a variety of partners in the regions, tribes, counties, NGOs, RCDs, held together through an MOMU that has principles related to equity and transparency, effectiveness with taxpayer dollars, syncing up tribal, state, federal, and local priorities, recognizing tribal sovereignty and local autonomy, and really focusing on common ground. Next slide, please. So with funding from the Department of Conservation and with a lot of great feedback from the task force and many of the partners in the room, the North Coast Resource Partnership developed its regional priority plan several years ago. And it was basically a shared visioning process over a 3-year period with over 500 meetings with various entities throughout the region, tribes, counties, NGOs, RCDs. And it culminated in this plan, which I believe you have a link for if you'd like to dive deeper into it. But there are numerous actionable priorities and strategies included in the plan, many of which we are well underway and that we're already working on in collaboration with an array of local, state, federal partners. And we're in the process of updating the plan as we speak. It's an adaptive plan and digital in nature. Next slide, please. So a key element of all of our planning work is that we constantly align and integrate and downscale and implement the relevant priorities of our state and federal partners. And so, for example, we're always tracking the Task Force Wildfire and Landscape Resilient Action Plan and other action plans and priorities to incorporate, where relevant, those elements into the North Coast strategy so that they can be implemented in kind of a seamless, integrated way. Same is true for the DOC RFFC program objectives, as well as the objectives and priorities of multiple state and federal agencies. And at the local level, throughout the region, we have thousands of partners in the North Coast region, and we integrate their local priorities with state and federal priorities. Next slide, please. So one of the foundational way that we work is with this adaptive planning, prioritization, implementation, and reporting framework, which integrates regional assessments and spatial analysis and modeling, much of which is provided by the state of California and the federal government. Things like LiDAR data and wildfire modeling and burn probability, et cetera, but then integrating that with local knowledge like Indigenous science and TEK and getting that 1 + 1 = 10 effect of driving forward really thoughtful identification of strategic actions and projects, and then using these data, both the local data and the regional data, to help prioritize, evaluate, and select projects and strategic actions. That's done by our Leadership Council and our technical committee. And then to inform collaborative and multi-objective plan development like our RPP. And then underlying all of this is a very strong emphasis, as Patrick and several other people have noted, on technical assistance and capacity investments. And we really appreciate the DOC RFFC's program emphasis on capacity and TA so that all boats rise with the tide and that all entities in our region have access to the significant funding through the climate bond and other mechanisms. And then with our partners, we work on the implementation of our plan and projects. And then we have an incredibly strong focus on performance reporting and metrics so that we can share return on investment with our funding agency partners as well as the general public. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But then we, as a result of those performance metrics, we then use that to inform the next turn of the wheel, as it were, and improve our processes. And all of this is underlain by decision-making by tribal and county representatives, and we like to call it democracy at its finest because they represent broad constituencies throughout the region. Next slide. So just a quick example of integrating that regional data and local knowledge. So on the left-hand side is LiDAR data showing fuel loading in the black and white pixels, and then proximity to communities, whether that be building footprints or roads. And you can imagine how valuable that is at a region of our size to really look at things more objectively and try to understand where the priorities are, as Patrick was saying, around using real data-driven approach. But then integrating that with local knowledge. On the right-hand side, our tribal engagement director leading a PODS workshop and integrating this regional remotely sensed data with this local knowledge to then drive priorities on the ground, like you see in that center picture of some prescribed fire work being done. Next slide. So we have very strong emphasis on identifying, prioritizing, mapping, and implementing with our partners a broad portfolio of landscape scale multi-benefit projects. So we're constantly mapping and updating the status of projects in the North Coast region. So you can see here some point locations showing, whether a project is VTP ready, whether it has its permits, whether it's a future partner project that needs some additional support, where technical assistance has been provided, where it needs to be provided, and then completed implementation projects. And this map is a little bit outdated, but we're constantly updating the underlying GIS database. And then on the right, you see kind of geographic footprints of some of these point location projects. So you can see that there's very good coverage throughout the region, working with our partners to implement these multi-year, objective projects at the regional scale. But we also have some gaps. And so this is helpful in understanding where those gaps are and how best to fill them. Next slide. And we regularly ask partners for their priorities in the region. So this was an ArcGIS Survey 123 process that went out several months ago, asking partners like what are their needs under the Proposition 4 climate bond and other funding that might be coming down the pike. And you can see here the response that we got was that, well over 542 projects were identified at a cost of over $3 billion. And this is really just scratching the surface. So understanding the sheer magnitude of the need, using the best available science and data to then drive prioritization so that we're really matching the funding with the areas of greatest need and greatest priority in the region is a big part of our work. And it's also a way that we can kind of downscale and integrate with the task force action plan. Next slide. So in terms of capacity, DOC has funded a lot of capacity work, as have other agencies like DWR, et cetera. So just an example of some of the technical assistance projects that NCRP has been able to fund with that partner support from the funding agencies. 152 technical assistance grants have gone to partners in the region. And just for grant assistance, even though we do other forms of assistance like mapping or CEQA, et cetera, but just grant assistance has been about $2 million. And grants have been submitted as a result of that, over 102 grants, and that has leveraged over $84 million in on-the-ground funding in the region. So really great ROI on this relatively modest investment in capacity and TA for under-resourced entities in the region. Next slide. And so finally, we track all of our projects, and we have this project tracking tool. And so we have spatially explicit data about each and every project and what stage it's in, whether it's just a concept proposal, planning, implementation, post-implementation. And then for every project that we fund with funding from our partners, we gather a variety of performance metrics ranging from sediment runoff to acres treated to habitat restored to jobs created to local revenue, carbon sequestered, et cetera. So this allows us to report back to the funding agencies and the general public about the impact of these investments in the North Coast region. Next slide. So with that, I thank you and look forward to answering any questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. That was a very rich presentation with, such a lot of great projects and approaches to wildfire resilience in your region mentioned. Really appreciate the 3 regional speakers. We do have a few minutes for Q&A right now with the presenters or task force staff. I'm going to go ahead and try to summarize a question that we have in the Q&A, and this might be a good one for the regional speakers. There's a question about how you might advise a new organization or maybe an existing organization that's trying to gain access to funding and become more active in the wildfire space in your region. So yeah, what advice might you give to an organization for how they can approach and get funding for wildfire resilience work in your region, acknowledging it's case specific, but general advice?
Well, I'll just jump in real quick. All of the North Coast Resource Partnerships meetings are open to the public. They're quarterly, And all of our RFPs are open to the public. So anytime there's a funding opportunity, that goes out to the NCRP listserv, which has thousands of people on that listserv. And if you are not already on it, you can sign up on the North Coast Resource Partnership website on the main page. And we welcome engagement and inclusion from everybody in the region.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I'll just similarly chime in that for the Intercoast Collaborative region, definitely encourage folks to visit the website that Sean pasted in the chat, and you can find your local regional lead partner for the Intercoast Collaborative contact in there. So that's just a good person to reach out to within your specific county to learn about opportunities for collaboration and make sure that your needs and projects are being captured in our regional priority plan so that when more implementation funding comes online, we have those needs captured there. Thanks.
I think I'll just add to that. Obviously, like certainly reach out to me or one of the RCDs for the Northern Sacramento Valley Coalition area. But within our RCDs, we've had plenty of partners who have reached out and asked for assistance with projects. I know like the Western Shasta RCD has worked with the Igo Ono Community Services District. They wanted help with a grant. And so, I think the RCDs have really shown an ability and flexibility to work with partners on grant applications, being partners. So certainly, anything is worth an email or a phone call.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate all three of you jumping in. We are running short on time to wrap the webinar up on time. I'm seeing a question. We haven't heard any question yet from Anna. Anna, if you have a quick question to pose, maybe direct your question to who you think might be best to answer it.
Oh, hi. This is a question for Karen, because I just noticed that the need for the NCRP region added up to $3 billion, but with the climate bond being $10 billion over the next 7 to 10 years, I was just wondering how you would prioritize those projects as to like which ones are most important and if there's like other sources of funding to try to meet those goals.
Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think we were struck by that number and also know that that number is not a complete number and it's actually much higher than that for the North Coast region. We prioritize projects in a variety of ways, and it's in the link for the vision plan. There is a detailed description of our prioritization process. Probably don't have time to describe it in detail today, but it basically is linking regional data and in many cases statewide derived data with local knowledge, and then running it through a prioritization process that is criteria based, and with ultimately our technical peer review committee reviewing projects that come in requesting funding, and then ultimately our leadership council making a decision on a slate of recommended projects that are submitted to them by the staff team and the technical peer review committee. So again, I probably don't have time to go into detail, but really suggest you look at that adaptive planning and prioritization framework because it really spells out how the NCRP does its project prioritization.
Thanks so much, Karen. We are going to wrap things up now with a couple slides for the audience. We are in the middle of a 60-day partner review period on the draft action plan, so please review and provide your feedback using the web-based feedback form available at the link that's been put in the chat and is here on screen or available through wildfiretaskforce.org. There's a web-based feedback form, and there's also ongoing tribal consultation. Get those comments in by August 7th, and a final draft is expected in the fall of this year. And finally, on our last slide, we just call out that there is a meeting in early October in Humboldt County. You can join in person or online. Similarly, December 11th in Sacramento, everyone is welcome. And you can also always join the Sacramento meetings online. at wildfiretaskforce.org, you'll find this recording, the plan, and really wonderful monthly updates to the governor that summarize everything happening in this space. So thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you to you all for your great questions and joining the webinar today. And from that, we will close it out.